There is a new book out, brand new, by Van Jones, who worked for Obama as the green jobs czar. I didn't like that czar bit. But they just didn't like what he was doing because he was creating green jobs for people. They got after him, and so he left. But he's the president of the NAACP says, Van Jones is an American treasure, one of the few Americans in recent years to have generated powerful new ideas that are creating more jobs here. So this is an important book. And one idea I had was to try to bring him to Portsmouth in the public library there. There, now we're all set. Okay.
Okay.
Now you're on.
I'm Richard Knight and my wife Elizabeth, and we attend these Wednesday meetings very religiously. We're from Rochester, and so when we were thinking about having someone speak to us, well, I immediately thought of Sandra Keans, because she is not only our city council person, but she is our legislator. She's been on the city council for 26 years. She's been in, this is her 28th year in the legislature. So if anybody knows the history of the New Hampshire legislature, it's her. And we knew her when she was a Republican, and we voted for her then, even though we're Democrats, because she is such a great person. And she has great views, and we met her on the peace marches and vigils and so forth. So with that, let us have Sandra Keans. It's K-E-A-N-S. I think the notice went out with an R in there.
I'm sorry, it's my fault.
Okay, Sandra.
Now, I couldn't take those meetings anymore. Can I sit down? Yeah.
She's a Democrat.
Yeah, so I'm a Democrat now. Those Republican meetings got to be pretty tough to handle. Oh, sure. That's right. Yeah, so I'm the sucker for punishment, I guess you'd say. But I come from a family that always thought you had to spend a lot of time on your community if you wanted your community to amount to anything. And so that's, I guess, sort of how I ended up with my political adventures here. But my first term, I was just basically out of UNH, a government major there, when I decided to run for the legislature. I had been messing around in politics since I was about 12, working at the Ward House with some of the old local Republican guys, and all men in those days. And so I found that there was an empty slot, and I decided to run, and so I've been off and on. I've been there for 14 terms since then. But been voted out of office a couple of times in Republican primaries because I didn't quite understand what the Republican line was that I was supposed to be doing, but that was okay. But now I'm a Democrat, and I can tell you that since my first term was 1967, and since then the legislature has changed immensely. Back then I was probably the dumbest person in the House. I hadn't really served in any other elected office, and what I found when I got there was that all the people there had been on a library trustee, they'd been a selectman, they'd been on the conservation committee, and they understood that what they were doing in Concord had a direct impact on what the folks were going to have to live with back at the local level. And that certainly is not what it's all about now. It's all about egos right now, particularly with some of these folks that have never served in any other office until they got to the state legislature, like your Free Staters and some of the O'Brien Republicans that have been identified here. So it's kind of a free-for-all. It's sort of like going back to 1820, and every man for himself. And I think about 50% of them are packing. And as I was telling her,
Really?
oh yeah. Oh yeah, the first bill we passed last January was to allow you to bring your gun onto the floor of the legislature.
Oh, packing you.
Yeah, that packing, yeah, that kind of, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, no, packing like this, you know? Yeah, no, I don't think they're leaving. So, it's a lot different. But someone asked the difference between the libertarians and the free staters.
Yes, I just met one when I was down in South Carolina and telling us all about their enclave here.
Oh, a free stater.
She identified herself as a free stater.
Yeah,
Oh,
right.
really?
There's a young man, I believe from Syracuse, but somewhere in upstate New York, about 7 or 8 years ago now, had thought, you know, if you really wanted to take over a place and institute your ideas, the place to come was New Hampshire, because we have such a large legislature, and you really can get elected from your local neighborhood, so to speak, because every 3,291 people have their own rep. So they encourage people to move in, and some folks with some money moved in, and they actually have, I call it a safe house, but I don't think it's not appropriate probably, but they have a home where you can move into the state and settle in there for 3 or 4 months with them until you figure out what you're going to do for work and which little town you actually want to move to try to run for office and take over. And so it's happening, and I'm not sure just how many are in the state, but I think a couple thousand are in the state. We don't, fortunately, they're not all in the legislature, but it's a pretty scary thing, because they come with philosophies and views that are totally alien, I think, to the New Hampshire way of life and to the New England way of life, frankly. It's not about your community, it's not about taking care of your fellow citizen or anything like that. Libertarians are, on the other hand, are basically just want a minimum amount of regulations and rules, and they just want to go on and do what they want to do. But they're willing, the free staters generally are all working for themselves too, which is, they're not working at a GE or a manufacturer or anything like that, because that's too confining, I think, for them. They have landscaping businesses. Many of them are in the computer field. They have whatever, computer businesses. So they're really disassociated from society, and the libertarians aren't really like that. They just want to limit the number of regulations and rules we have. So it's along the same line, but a lot less. Free staters are really for chaos and 1820s. Really, it's kind of scary.
Family-oriented and homeschooling. I mean, obviously
Oh yeah, homeschool. We don't
families
need schools. We don't need police departments. I brought some of the bills that they've introduced this past year, and it's the most recent one that really I thought is bizarre. They've actually had a couple of them, but one that they had last week was about code enforcement officers or police or anyone else couldn't go on your property without a warrant. So that's great, because if you don't ever want to put appropriate plumbing in your house, the building inspector can't really come on there until he gets a warrant. You know, so that involves the courts. You got to find a judge. You got to have probable cause before you can get the warrant. I mean, it just becomes a whole bizarre kind of thing of stamp. I believe it went through the House. You know, it's interesting because.
It seems to me the problem with that, you're having an incident within your house, someone called the police. We like to think they can come right in and rescue you, but you had to go find a judge somewhere. That doesn't make any sense to me. I want you to hear it now.
Too. Right. But you know, in a case of domestic violence or some assault going on in a family or in a home, the police have to come, witness it, go back, get a warrant. If they can find a judge, they can come back and make the arrest, which isn't likely to be still going on at that time. So it's they're all crazy things. They've had a bill in to do away with kindergarten, to do away with standards for schools. We've had, there is a constitutional amendment coming up, I think this fall, unless the Senate doesn't pass it, and that will be on the ballot, which we ought to check into, and everybody ought to be voting against, I think. Repealing the requirements for school districts to offer public kindergarten. Requiring the teaching of evolution as a theory in public schools. establishing a religious exemptions for individuals who do not wish to provide accommodations or goods or services for gay couples. Repealing the certificate of need law. And I'm not sure if you're familiar. The certificate of need is for medical facilities. The idea behind it, and I'd be the first to admit it has not worked perfectly through the years, but the idea is if Wentworth Douglas has a big fantastic machine that takes some kind of x-rays, probably Frisbee doesn't need one and Portsmouth needs one too, or if they're going to provide so many beds for heart disease, probably it doesn't need to be duplicated. That's how it should work. It has not always been perfect, but just simply repealing it is not, you know, what I think is a good idea, because then you can have overbuilding with medical facilities, and I don't, they've got to, you know, it seems to reason that the costs would go up for everybody if you do that.
Is this the bill where the, it's a for-profit,
Oh, that's a different one.
oh, that's different.
That's a different one, but that's an interesting one too.
Exclude
We had
Medicare.
that. Yes, and I think if any of you that watch any television at all, Channel 9, I think, has had a lot of the ads on for Cancer Center of New Hampshire or something like that, those cancer centers. And they were not going to have to go through the certificate of need process. That bill is what they got passed. They also will not take Medicare patients. They would take only private pay patients and insurance covered patients. And they would not have to pay the hospital tax that other hospitals have to pay.
Oh,
So it just, you know, there's a special tax for hospitals, and it's, because they don't pay the standard property tax on their hospital facilities. So it just, you know, and it's privately owned, so it's, is that really helpful for your community? Or are those are those dollars that they take in going to be going to some corporate headquarters somewhere else, or, so it's one of those things.
but it opens the door for other organizations to do very similar kinds of
It certainly does, and at the same time, if it drains patients off from your local
Right.
hospitals that are providing duplicate services.
Well,
So
apparently it drains the patients off who are most profitable.
Right, that's right. The profitable
So
ones
then
can pay.
they,
The
the
local
others,
hospital gets stuck with-
they're stuck with the ones
Or-
that cost, and who
Right,
pays
better.
for that?
Right. So the costs go up for everybody all the way around at the end of the day. But,
Where is that bill now?
it's in the Senate. It has passed the House. You know, it's funny, for a number of years, it's always, because there are only 24 senators, it has seemed like the lobbyists only need to get to 13 to get a piece of legislation passed, the majority of the Senate. And they've always sponsored a mess of bills for various organizations and various groups. And they have come to the House, and the House has looked at them sensibly, we think, and we've killed 90% of them. This session, it's all this gun legislation we passed, that everybody, every place can have a gun, and several of those pieces of legislation that get rid of, eliminating school standards. But all of those crazy bills have gone to the Senate, and they've either tabled them or sent them to committee or something. So we're looking at the Senate as being the sensible ones this year, which is kind of a crazy thought for me, because we've always looked at the Senate as being the crazy people, and we've been the sensible ones.
What's happening to the one about education?
Well, I'm not sure what any of these have been, because I know that several of them that have passed have also gone through the Senate, and the governor's threatened to veto, which is good. But we've overridden, I mean, last week we overrode his veto on the redistricting, which is pretty severe. Let me just take a minute to talk about redistricting.
Yes.
After the census, it's required to redistrict every 10 years. And gerrymandering is not illegal. We talk about it in negative terms, but it really says whoever's in power gets the right to make the changes. And every party, I think, probably has in the past looked at it as a way of working the figures a little bit, changing the lines a little bit so that they at least stay level, if not have some advantage. This year, the group in power has really taken it to a new extreme. And for instance, the congressional districts were within the deviation. There just happened to be as many people in the first district, Representative Ginter's district, as in Representative Bass's district. So we didn't really need to change the lines at all. You can't believe the shenanigans we've gone through for the last 2 weeks. We had, and the bill that finally passed moves, no, actually it's gonna come onto the floor next Wednesday. We'll move 20,000 people for no reason at all, really. And I don't know if it makes any difference whether you're voting for Carol Shea Porter or Ginter or Bass and Custer. I don't know, but it seems to me that if people know they're in one district or the other, it doesn't make a lot of sense to move 20,000 people for no reason at all. But that's what we've done. The Senate districts, the Republicans have carved out some interesting districts. Durham, the state Senate districts. For instance, Dover and Durham, and I don't know, Lee and Mabry or something, we're all in the same district. Right now, the new district for Dover will be with Somersworth. Durham and Mabry will be with Portsmouth and Newington. And so because they wanted to give a safe seat to Senator Stiles down in Hampton, and she had part of Portsmouth. Now, I happen to like Nancy Stiles, so I think she's one of the more reasonable people in the Senate. But
Why is she OR though?
Nancy Stiles?
O'Brien, OB. Why is she listed as?
Do you have Nancy down as an OB?
Now,
Well, she's.
It was kind of like this and that.
Yeah.
The person said, well, sometimes she
Well, I
moves one way and sometimes another.
Well, I wouldn't call Nancy an O'Brien. I would
Okay.
call her more of an, but you know, when there's only 24 of you gotta play a lot of patting each other on the back stuff in the Senate that you don't have to play in the House. A lot of it gets played, but you don't have to do that in the House. But at any rate, she has a nice safe seat now. She can be elected forever, I would suspect, or any Republican will be elected forever down there in the Newcastle, Northampton, Hampton, whatever. So essentially what they've done is they've carved out probably 14 or 15 safe Republican seats and 5 safe Democratic seats. Like the Portsmouth mixed in with Durham will certainly be a Democratic seat and probably forever. I mean, there might be a Republican that comes out of there, but. So they've done that, and I guess it's okay. My district used to be Rochester, Somersworth, Barrington, and Rollinsford. No, not Rollinsford, but anyway, Rochester, Somersworth, and Barrington were the 3 major communities in it. Now it will go from Rochester, Farmington, Alton, New Durham, Gilmington. But it'll be a Republican seat, you know. So in some ways, while they've carved out seats to help themselves, they've also made it more difficult on themselves to probably find candidates, because I can't imagine a candidate wants to go from Rochester to Gilmington. Maybe. So it's been kind of screwy over the way it's been done, but they've carved out safe seats, but it hasn't always been in what I consider the best. And New Hampshire does not have any regulations. Some states have regulations that they have to be not only numerically, and numerically it's everybody. I mean, that's the Constitution of the United States, not only as well as our own. Numerically correct, but some states actually have, and community of interest is supposed to be one of the factors that you use. Now that's,
What does that mean?
well, community of interest, cities have different problems. Cities have different problems than towns do. I mean, we have our own school districts, and we have rubbish pickup, and we have sewer systems and all of that, that generally towns don't have those kinds of services. So you have, and also when the educational funding comes out, that's always a big hassle, because cities always have a lot of underprivileged people, so they're usually hurting in their school districts and expecting more state aid. a lot of the cities think, I mean, the towns think that they're paying too much in taxes toward education. So there should be a community of interest. And one of the things they've done this year is take 2 wards of Manchester and mix them in with Litchfield, a very wealthy suburb, not very wealthy, but moderately wealthy suburb, rather than have them, and Manchester's entitled to 27 reps all by itself. It doesn't need to be mixed in with another community. Same thing with Concord. They've taken a ward of Concord and mixed it in with one of the adjacent towns. So, which just don't need to happen. That it could be done in a better fashion than that. But it's a way to make sure that Manchester doesn't have all Democratic reps from there. And they don't actually now, but it's a way to guarantee it won't happen. So, but that's not illegal as long as your numbers are correct. As long as you have the right number. But I know some states, pardon me?
How often is this?
Every 10 years after the census, they redistrict, yeah. I know that some states actually have a geographic component as well. That's one of the factors you have to have. New Hampshire does not have that, so our regulations really are very loose in terms of that, and just essentially making sure the numbers are correct. And that was it. So.
How do you feel about the way they manipulated? They rammed it through very quickly and didn't allow the Democrats to caucus.
Well, that was a shock to most of us that had spent more than one term there, because the governor's veto is always, the governor vetoed the first plan that went through. And it came, so we were not expecting last Wednesday to have an override. And because it usually gets printed, I brought, here's my little shaggy, because it's had a lot of tough work on it the last few days. But every day when we go over to the house, we get the calendar. And this tells you the bills that we're going to work on here, and in the back part of the hearings that are going to come up, and the real back are the amendments to the bills that will be heard. Have those around if you want. So, but generally in this calendar will be the governor's veto message. It will be printed for generally 2 days. And right now, where we're meeting once a week, it would have been 2 weeks. We would have seen the governor's message on why he vetoed the bill. And all of a sudden, the other day, without it having been printed at all, even once, we were being asked to vote on an override. And it came out of the clear blue sky. It came out in the middle of the day. If we were in the middle of the calendar, we had done a half a dozen bills, and all of a sudden he called a recess. And the Republicans, because there are 300 of them, caucus in the House chamber. We were all asked to leave, and for 20 minutes, and when we came back, we were voting on an override. So we had, and then one of our leaders asked Deputy Majority Leader, I guess his title is. Well, no, the minority.
Oh.
Steve Shurtleff went up and asked if we could have a 15-minute caucus so the Democrats could talk about this, and he said absolutely not. We're going to vote. So we voted, and we obviously didn't have our act together, not that we probably could have stopped it anyway with only 100 Democrats and probably 25 or 30 Republicans that vote with us on these issues. But so it went sailing through, and we were shocked that it's that's what's most shocking, I think, is the lack of protocol of following what we've always done. It's not, you know, if it's always been printed, I don't think it says anywhere it has to be printed. But it's always been printed.
O'Brien wrote a letter, O'Brien and 2 other Republicans wrote a letter to the editor, which came out this week in our paper, the portion paper.
Gene Chandler, Ben Ford is the majority leader, and Gene Chandler is the former. Thank you.
It sounded pretty plausible.
He's a former speaker.
There was a deadline of April 6th, so they were only
just
meeting
no,
once a week, so they just had to do it this way.
Right, and it just, you know, I mean, we have.
He said the Democrats have been delaying.
He's absolutely wrong, lying, but O'Brien doesn't mind lying, which is interesting. Every member gets one of these little black books that has all the rules in it, has our addresses in it, has the Constitution in it, and has the senators in it, and what have you. And we all call it our little Bible because it's got everything we're supposed to need. But we point out a rule to him. And he said, well, that doesn't pertain to this particular issue. So we go right on. And I've never seen anyone, in all these years, the arrogance is just unbelievable of not, so we have no rules, basically. I mean, we think we adopted a set of rules here, but apparently we didn't, you know, because we ignore them all the time. But, so it's a pretty scary place.
Is O'Brien the person who's been there a long time, or is he a newcomer?
O'Brien, he served a term back 6 years ago, I believe. I think he's only been in New Hampshire maybe half a dozen, no, maybe 8 years or 10 years. He was the law partner of the former Speaker of Massachusetts, Mr. Finneran, who I think is in jail right now. Yeah, so he did serve one term, and then he was out for 2 terms. And he came back this time, but I will say, he went around, you know, before this term and signed up all of these unusual people, these O'Brien Republicans and Free Staters, and there's a heavy contingent of, I don't know, an evangelical kind of touch to it that's promoted pretty heavily over there. I mean, and usually religion is a long ways from anything that goes on in the legislature. So.
Do they tend to be Free Staters too?
Oh, well, you know, it's hard to say. It's hard to say. I think some of them are, and people are telling me, no, they're 2 different groups. I look at them and I say, they're the same. What? The same group.
What two?
The evangelical and the Free Staters.
Oh, really?
I think, yeah. I think there's only pure Free Staters. I think there's only about 20. But I think when you combine that, the evangelicals that call themselves Free Staters, I think it's, you know, a much larger group. And then there are some that really are just have a religious bent to them. So it's just completely different than anything I've ever experienced before in serving in the years. And so I guess we can, I mean, I guess that's what democracy is all about.
All the craziness coming out of Congress right now. What do you envision our leaders to look like at the next election? Do you think some people are smart enough to get rid of those guys they put up there who want to take away so many of the issues that are beneficial to senior citizens and young kids?
Well,
and women.
One of the problems is, Foster's, for instance, used to have, that's my local paper, that they used to actually have a reporter there 3 days a week while the legislature was in session. They don't anymore. So they'll write an editorial and I'll say, you know, where does this editorial come from? It's not anything that like happened over there. So I don't know where they get their information from, but it's not very good, you know, it's not very accurate, it's not very good, and so I think it's hard for people at the local level, unless we get more letter writing from folks that are over there or something, to let people know. And I don't know how else, I mean, they all tell me that people are getting their news on computer, not me, of course, because I'm caught back in the 70s, but I guess a lot of people go on computer and get their news, and I don't know whether you can get all that's going on. If you can, and you do get your news off the computer, I would say go to the Concord Monitor, because that seems to be the most accurate paper that's covering Concord right now.
But the Herald has been doing better lately, like Sheer Hammerman has done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't see it wasn't done.
Yeah.
But there are new owners there, and I think.
What?
Are there new owners at the Herald?
No, I think a few years ago someone bought them out, the Herald. But they kept on the same, for the most part, the same people.
But all the newspapers, I understand it, let people go because they don't have the money to pay. I mean, they don't have the money to pay for anything.
Subscribers are way down.
Yeah.
Well, the social networking is hurting them because of what you said early on. Every other person has a computer and 1,000 newspapers they can carry in their pockets. Like I read 3 or 4 of them a day.
Yeah.
And some of them pretty good, even with live animation. And so I know that the Rochester Daily Democrat has cut back quite a bit in its employees. And some people are working from home and only so many hours a day. The size of the newspaper is down about a third of what it was 10 years ago. But the price went up 25 cents a week this week for those who get the forces. I think you know.
Oh my daughter, she gets on the computer and she reads the New York Times, so she's probably a lot smarter than I am, but I don't, you know, but it just, I know, she wouldn't pick up a newspaper if her life depended on it, because she just goes on the computer and that's what she does, you know, but.
So a citizen should be subscribing to newspapers.
Really?
I
Yeah.
used to get Foster's and Portland, just to support the cause. I think that's back to the Herald.
Another,
And the Exeter newsletter.
pardon me?
The Exeter newsletter is a good
Oh, is it? Yeah.
newsletter for
Well,
Exeter.
you know, there are a couple of legislators, well, for instance, there are 4 or 5 legislators from the town of city of Lebanon, and they actually have decided among themselves to put out a newsletter every week. And that's what they do, and it's a pretty accurate description of what went on and stuff like that. But I just am so worried that so many people don't really have, until it really impacts them, until there's something that actually hits them, I'm not sure.
Well, we need people like you to go out and talk about it.
Well, I think most of my friends try to do that if they have. They want to do away with Social Security, by the way. That's another one of their cute little ones. They turned down $1 million to try and figure out how to use the, how to develop our own system for the Health Care Act. That was one of the cute ones. The one we worked on last week that was pretty scary was having a company could pay for a seat for a child at a religious school, get a tax credit for that on their business profits tax, and the state would not take in the money, so they wouldn't distribute any school aid, and so the local doesn't, and I mean, and it doesn't take a math genius to figure out that if you move 30 kids out of a school, you can't shut the school down, but yet the school's gonna learn and lose over $4,000 apiece from state aid. So that's but they don't really believe in public schools. And they don't see the social value in that. So it's, yeah, there's no sense of community there at all, that you have to take care of your fellow man, and that we're, you know, an educated population is good for all of us. You know, not just my kid, but all of us as a society.
Even
So
evangelicals. Evangelicals should be Christian in their heart.
Right, yeah, right, exactly, yeah. So it is, yeah. And actually, they had a bill in to give money to homeschoolers. So I don't know where that, I think we killed that one in the House, I'm not sure. There've just been so many of them, it's been hard to track, and then some have gotten killed in the Senate, but after I've had my opportunity of voting no on most of this junk, I really haven't worried about it, because I know the governor is got his veto pen out there, and I shudder to think what will happen next year if we have either Obed LaMontagne or Kevin Smith as the governor, because I know none of this will get, if we get the same kind of legislation, none of it would get vetoed. I think we'd be spending a lot of time in the courtrooms, because I think there'd be a lot of court challenges. That's the other thing. These folks don't believe in 3 branches of government. Because we're called the general court, and I'm not a real historian, but apparently back in the 1770s, it sort of took the place of the courts. In other words, if you had a claim against the state, you didn't go to a courtroom, you actually went to the legislature, and, you know, and they would settle that claim. So there are a lot of folks over there that think that that's still going on, and we can do away with the courts, but it's pretty scary.
Did you already mention the probability of these people running for re-election? I I mean, I heard it in our meeting the other night that a lot of them are gonna pack their bags. That's why that word packing,
Really, was there some thought?
Unless they start shooting each other because they're packing, you know.
I've actually heard over there that there's some indication that some of these folks are saying, well, we don't care, we're just coming in here to raise as much hell and havoc and as we can this term, and then we're leaving, you know, we're not gonna run again. But I don't, I think they're so, there's that little, you get those, well, you don't really get the number plates, you pay an extra $5 for them or something, but, you ride around with that number plate on your car, and people call you the honorable, and I got a feeling some of those folks that are saying they were there for just one term are gonna, yeah, kind of like that little thing, so that they won't.
When they're declaring whether they're gonna run again, because of the June date?
Well, because of this redistricting thing, it should be June, should be like the June 10th, about that second week of June, but the redistricting will probably slow that down a little bit and probably push it back a little, unless it goes to court. And apparently there are several groups out there that have said they consider themselves abused by the redistricting, will take it to court. But I haven't heard anybody come forward yet, so I don't know whether it's really gonna happen. If that happens, it might get delayed, the filing period get late, but we should know by the end of June, I would think, how many of them are running again. And
Even those who lose, I think, do this fade back into the community and play havoc at a lower level, maybe at city or town level. That's true. So we have to be very vigilant, I think.
we actually had 3 of these free staters run for school board in Rochester this past year, and fortunately, none of them got elected, but we got one that got elected to, one's serving on the zoning board, so that's interesting.
What's the reward, in a sense, monetarily for a city council person versus legislature versus senate? Is there any?
Well, and we actually, I think the mileage is something like 49 cents a mile over and back, but we had our majority leader who was living with his girlfriend in Concord, who was supposed to be representing Salem and was putting in his mileage sheet every day, but he wasn't going to Salem every day, so he's in a little bit of hot water for that. But I think it's like 40, it's a sliding scale, it's like 49 cents for the first 50 miles, and then it drops to 47 cents for the next 50 miles, and so everybody gets paid a little bit different in terms of that, but the pay is obviously $100 a year. That's our old constitution, and that's it. But
That's all for
right,
the whole year.
right, right.
That's unreal.
But, and so the reps, what is my check? I'm 38 miles, so 76 round trip, and I think my check is $42 for the day, which, but you have the reps that live in Concord, they get 50 cents a day, whether they need it or not. So, so it's all based on mileage, because the Constitution has the salary in it. There've been a lot of conversations through the years about whether you should cut the size of the legislature or not. And then clearly there's a couple hundred people sitting around doing nothing. It's a place to go, and it's kind of an interesting place to go. But yeah, but they're not really actively involved in the process over there. But, so you could, in that respect, cut the House and probably get the Constitution changed to give everybody $500 a year or something like that. But I've changed my views through the years, because what I figured out is it's pretty hard to bribe 201 people. In the Senate, you go over to the Senate and you convince, and those people in the Senate are spending $80,000 a year to get elected. I mean, not every 2 years, which I find preposterous for $100 a year job. But but yeah, and so I find it hard to. So I'm now an advocate of keeping the 400 members of the House, because I'm saying it's pretty hard to get 200 of them wrapped up in a corner to get them to vote a particular way. Now, I've been proven wrong this year, obviously, but generally speaking, it's kind of a roadblock for a lot of bad stuff. So,
I have another question. The Southern Poverty Law Center says that New Hampshire has 2 or 3 hate groups.
yeah.
Are
Actually,
any-
4.
4.
It doubled since 2010.
Is there any way of knowing who in the legislature, if there are any, are members of these groups?
I don't know, I belong to the Poverty Center too, and I've gotten that letter recently, I haven't been magazine lately. I don't know, but I've got a feeling there's a couple of those free staters that might be involved. They're
Well, they
just
make
so
some pretty
far out.
Bad statements, I mean, what, racist statements and whatnot I've seen in the newspapers.
Yeah.
So,
It's, yeah, I mean, that's just something, and it's not very civilized over there anymore, which is another kind of discouraging thing that, and I was telling someone that, you know, all the years I was a Republican in the old days, nobody ever came up and berated me for however I voted. And there was never, and it was always looked that if you were having a piece of legislation that you were sponsoring, whichever party you were in, you went and got a couple people on from the other party to sponsor it. That's not so in the House anymore. And if you should be even talking to a Democrat, you know, that's a terrible thing. And
The
so-
Republicans are not the Republicans that I remember. I think there's been a big change, because I have a son who's a Republican in the Navy. I even voted for Ronald Reagan, you know. I mean,
I don't think Ronald would be allowed.
he wouldn't win, as someone said today. But I vote for the person, not for the party.
Definitely
Not a herd follower.
Nelson Rockefeller or Dwight Eisenhower, they would absolutely not be allowed in the party. Dan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I wanted to mention or ask, haven't most of the special elections since 2010 gone to Democrats? I mean,
4
my
out
own
of 5.
district, Barrington, we elected one.
Yeah, Bob Herrick.
And
He's a good
what,
guy.
there's one in Mount Vernon, right?
Yeah,
Isn't that
right,
the
the
speaker's district?
Right.
That would never have been Democrats. I find that very encouraging. I mean, it seems like people are catching on.
The thing, it's given them an opportunity, though, when you have a special election, for a lot of the groups to actually focus on that and remind people what was going on. But I think all the Democrats have really, I mean, even the moderate Republicans have really enjoyed the Mount Vernon issue, when there was a Democrat elected to replace O'Brien's best pal, you know, and because Mount Vernon's where O'Brien's from. So that was, I mean, we've all remembered that day. Had some partying with that one, but yeah, but 4 out of the 5 special elections went to Democrats. So,
And
and
are Democrats encouraged, thinking that they're going to
Well,
see some big gains?
we are, but you know, the redistricting is a problem. They've gotten, this thing calls for some pretty, and I know what it's like to run in a large district. Rochester tried to screw around 10 years ago to take care of a particular city councilor. And because of that, it got thrown out by the Supreme Court. And we've all had to run at large in Rochester, which is 44 square miles. And it's very costly to run for a legislative job across the whole city. And that's what's happened with this Republican plan, the House redistricting. There are some huge flotillas. And while they may not go to Democrats, or, you know, but, or they may go to Democrats, but it's gonna be folks running in districts that you don't know who is running. I mean, that to me was always the beauty of the New Hampshire House, is you ran amongst your neighbors, so you knew them. And this redistricting plan really kind of throws that out, so. But we're hoping, I mean, even Steve Valancourt, I don't know if any of you ever heard Steve's name, but he's been a long-term member of the House of Representatives, and he's run as a Libertarian. He's right now, he's a Republican, but he's an anti-O'Brien Republican, but he does a lot of prediction on the races, and he's predicting the Democrats will pick up between 70 and 80 seats.
Do you think the New Hampshire motto would help encourage the free staters to come in, live free or die?
question about it.
So we can go up there and do anything we want to, but.
Yeah. I didn't vote for that, by the way. I was in the House when that motto was chosen, and I didn't vote for it back then.
What was the model before that? Was there a different model?
No, we didn't have one. And it's been like since 72 or something like that when we voted for it. And I thought, that's gonna cause trouble. And that's one vote I'm glad I made. So,
It was interesting, I was just in South Carolina and Hilton had, visiting a friend, and we happened to be, ironically, at the old foundations of an old plantation and a slave house, and we ran into this woman, and, you know, she was identified herself quickly as a Free Stater. She lives in Chicago, and when she heard we were from New Hampshire, she was so excited to meet us, and like immediately assuming that we must be Free Staters too. I know you're so lucky to live in New Hampshire, so, you know, and how they were planning to come here. She said that there was, you know, a whole website, and, you know, we were pretty honest with her. I mean, we listened to her respectfully, but, you know, said, we're Democrats, and, you know, we absolutely don't believe as you do, but she just thought, you know, everybody in New Hampshire must be a Free Stater.
I'll tell you, they are all computer savvy.
Yeah, her husband was
They
an
are
IT person.
all computer savvy. And that's how they stay connected, and that's how they pull off whatever they pull off. And it's very, I'm envious sometimes because I'm such a Luddite, but yeah, and it's, they're interconnected all the time, and and sometimes I think they're planning strategy that even O'Brien doesn't understand is coming up. But,
Well, she said on those, I mean, they have houses, they always tell each other, we have a house for sale, or, and
Yep.
mention the same house.
Yep.
I don't know what-
Rent and jobs, and they have a whole wonderful network. You sort of have to admire that in a way. So,
Some of them run as couples. So, do you
Some
know any
of them run
couples
as
in
couples?
the?
Oh, yeah, oh,
Yeah.
yeah. One of the big couples are the O'Briens.
One is bad enough.
Absent. And apparently, you know, their story is, and I've got to accept it, they came here from, I think, Washington or Oregon or something. But supposedly, they're both MIT graduates. And whatever, neither one are working now, and apparently they built this monstrosity of a house over in Epsom, not too far from the Epsom Circle, and that's one of the safe houses that folks can come to and stay for a couple of months or 3 months or something until they figure out which community they want to go into and take over. And the O'Briens have this castle on the hill over there.
This is in Epsom?
Yeah, on 28, between the Circle and Hooksett. I haven't been by to see it, but I've had people tell me how wonderful it is. Yes.
Now, at least in Durham, and I think this is true for all towns, you can't, if you're on some committee, or like I was on the Energy Committee for a while, we couldn't talk, a couple of us couldn't talk with each other and plan any kind of strategy or anything without it being, that was illegal, or even to email each other and talk about it. We could talk about facts, but not about anything. And I'm wondering if that is true in the not, is it not?
It was true right here in Dover for a long time.
Legislature has exempted themselves from the 91A. Very convenient. I mean, at the local level, you know, or even in the state offices, or any of that. They, you know, anything that's public information has got to be held out in public, and you got to have the minutes available in 72 hours or 144 hours, I guess, and things like that. But the legislature itself is exempted.
Is that a recent move, or is that?
No, well, relatively recent, maybe 8 years ago, something like that. And then particularly they make a big deal about the caucuses, but it seems to me that would be exempt anyway, but I don't have a big deal, but, you know, like the committee minutes, the committee meetings are always open, and the executive committee, when you actually vote, are supposed to be open and supposed to be noticed. But sometimes we forget to notice that the vote's going to take place, you know. Somehow or other, it didn't get posted. I told the secretary to post it, but she somehow forgot to post it. All of a sudden you're voting, and you didn't know you were going to be. But yeah, but there's a lot of it. Yes.
Floor leader. And well.
Right. floor leader is supposed to, if people are confused because of the various motions that might be going on a bill or something, they're supposed to explain to their members that we're going to be supporting, you know, the position that the caucus has taken is that we want to support X, Bill 1670 or something like that. And so they're supposed to remind people in case they forget. And I think, generally speaking, it's always been pretty relaxed. I don't know what the Republicans are doing right now, but I suspect it's not quite as relaxed as that. What's happened is all the years I was a Republican, they tell you that the committee voted 14-7 to pass this bill, and so we're supporting it because it would be good for the local communities. It would be sending more school aid back to the communities or something like that. That's what they're supposed to be doing. I don't know. Because sometimes, you know, you'll get like multiple motions on the same bill. Last week we had one that had 10 motions on it. And frankly, everybody was confused by the time we got to the fourth motion. So, you know, and so that's what they should be doing. I don't know what they do now, but our Democrats aren't very, they say, hey, let's all vote for this one. You know, we're not very, but I get sort of frustrated with my newfound Democratic Party because, how do I want to say it? They still think the other guys are nice guys and that they wouldn't pull a fast one. And I don't believe it, you know, so I'm saying we gotta get more organized here. So, but you remember Fred, right? They were pretty loosey-goosey, you know, in those days. So, and right now, I'll tell you very frankly, with only 100 members, it's pretty different. And, you know, any one day there's probably 15 people missing from the, there's probably between 40 and 60 people missing out of the 400. And you just hope they are the guys you're looking for to vote with you. We had to have a quorum call last week because there were so many people out last Thursday. We had a couple of. I don't think you can get one of those. I think they publish just, yeah, right. This is a member. I don't know what they get. I don't know. Maybe they do. Maybe the lobbyists buy these, but there are a couple other ones that get published with all the legislators' names and stuff like that, but they don't have the House rules and all that stuff in them. That this has. Probably. Oh, well, you know, there is a. And I only buy one like every 10 years, which is I might as well not buy one because they're useless. By the time you bought it, everybody changes the next election. We lose between 25 and 30% of the membership changes every 2 years. Now, some of those people that come back have been there maybe 6 years ago or something like that, so it's not totally brand new faces, but there is a 25 to 30% turnover every 2 years. But there's a new group that's been putting out this, it's a little bit larger than that, and it's a blue book, and it has theoretically your biographies, except most of the Free Staters I noticed, and I borrowed a book last week, don't have any information in them. They might tell you, they don't tell you when they were born, or sometimes not where, and where they went to school or anything like that. Every once in a while.
A lot of people don't have bios on it, at least online they don't.
No, and it's, I've never seen that book. I'm glad I didn't buy one this term because it's really, half of it is, there's virtually nothing. We used to have a few privacy wonks, like Neil Kerr. Remember Neil? Neil would never publish anything of his in there. He was, I'm sure he actually lives in the city he represents because he has nothing there. But a lot of the new folks I've noticed have come in and have not put anything down for information, just the community they represent, and that's it. So pretty hard to, I think, track them down, find out where they came from. But
I would think that the Democrats would be working hard to get people, good people to run.
I think Terry Norelli is busting her a little fanny. Oh. I think she is. She's been out. She's been all over the state already. Okay. Talking with folks in the various communities, and I know she's got me on task in Rochester to be getting some folks, so, you know.
Definitely can't become complacent. It's gonna be a change. You have to actually become activists, I think.
So,
Who are some other Democratic legislators who are providing that kind of leadership, recruiting the next generation?
yeah, that's sort of what you're doing. You know, what I've always found, and I think we all pretty much believe it now, is that the easiest candidates to get elected are the ones that have committed to their community, that you know them from other activities. They've worked in the Boy Scouts, or they've worked on Little League, or something like that, and so, if we go into a community where there's nobody that's an incumbent or anything running, we kind of look for those kind of folks that have been active in the community, to hope. And not only that, it kind of shows that they have a commitment to the community as well, but. A
lot of Free Staters come from the Southwest, over by Keene. Someone said that they were in that district.
Well, I think the western part of the state has more, it's more rural.
Yeah.
And so therefore the rural, you know, you're not gonna find them in the cities. They don't come to Concord and Manchester and Nashua and Rochester and Dover. They go out there where they can buy 10 acres of land and put up the gate, and you can't see the tent they're living in or whatever.
I've gone to the website for Free Staters in New Hampshire, there are residential areas right around Keene, which are giving the police a lot of problem. These Free Staters are constant pain in the neck to the police because they go against zoning laws and everything flagrantly, and they test the no smoking laws in restaurants and everything, and the police are, from what I gather, are, you know, it's just an overload.
Yeah. It's sort of.
But for every 20 pro-Free Stater entries on the website, you know, they all write very positive things about themselves. There's every so often you get one that tells the truth, that is telling it the way it is.
Yeah.
Oh, the negative ones?
Yeah.
Probably people who are concerned about them.
So these are just like bloggers on their website?
Yeah, but most of them, I guess it's true in a lot of these, you know, radical organizations. They advertise for themselves by writing glowing reports about all their activities, but and pretend to be, you know, what's the Fox motto?
Fair and balanced.
Fair and balanced, yeah.
Well, in doing the whole state is like this one, I happen to know Molly Kelly.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, how come a Democrat could, you know, because I understood the same thing that you did, that the Free Staters were in the Southwest. I think there are a number in Hillsborough, and let's see, what's next to Hillsborough? Hennigan? Well, Hillsborough's the main. There are a number in Hillsborough. I don't know about Merrimack.
There are a lot in Grafton, I know.
And Grafton way up there, okay. Yeah, I haven't gotten Grafton yet. And maybe some in Sullivan too, but Cheshire's a lot of Democrats there. And she said, Molly said it was because of Keene.
Right, Keene is, yeah, that's, and the suburbs are there, but when you move away from, when you get 15 miles outside of Keene, it gets a little Republican. You know, like Jaffrey, for instance, is sort of a suburb, but they're all Republican over there.
Okay. But Hillsborough, I think, is.
Yeah, so when you get outside of Manchester and Nashua and Bedford and,
Yeah.
not Bedford, yeah, Bedford, and then once they can find a few acres of land, they're not interested in living in an apartment building or where they can see their neighbor's house. You can't really practice your shooting and your guns and all that stuff if you're right next door to somebody, you know. We used to have that 300-foot business. I don't even know if we have that anymore.
quite an
And we have our
article
own-
in Wire about Free Staters.
Oh,
Free Association,
is
they
this
call
a
it.
while back?
This is February.
yeah.
February
I did
22nd
see
to
that.
28th, Free Association, they called it, and then a decade-old Free State project. It's got some interesting info.
Yeah, it was a young punk kid too, he was like only 27 years old or something, that came up with this idea and started putting it on the web, and
They claim they were looking for 20,000 people to move in, and
yeah, I know,
1,000, 2,000 is
yeah,
already
what
done,
they've
so-
gotten, yeah,
Yeah,
so
there was
far.
There was a Free Stater that came, and he was MIT, to Portsmouth, and the Portsmouth Herald put it on the front page, sort of welcoming
Oh,
him.
yeah.
It was really pretty crazy, and I think.
Yeah, it was a nice warmer.
Right, and Francis, I think Francis from NAACP was going to call and say, hey, look, how about you're covering what Free Staters are like? But we had a speaker Monday night at NAACP, Jessica Clark, and she's with America Votes. And their thing is on voting laws and IDs and stuff. But there's another